The rain had started just after dawn, a slow drizzle that painted the windows of the Manhattan penthouse in streaks of silver. It was the kind of morning that made the city look softer than it actually was, quiet, almost forgiving. But inside the glass tower that bore his name, Alexander Whitmore didn't notice the rain. He was already 3 calls deep into what was supposed to be the most important business day of the quarter. He stood in his hotel suite in Singapore, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up, staring at the skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. His reflection stared back, sharp jawline, steel-gray eyes, the kind of face that had been on the cover of Forbes twice. At 42, Alexander Whitmore was everything the world told him to be: powerful, untouchable, successful beyond measure. If you're ready for a story about betrayal, hidden cruelty, and unexpected justice, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on the notification bell. This story will shake you. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and stay until the end because what this billionaire does next will leave you speechless. But this morning, something felt off. The global summit meeting, the one he'd flown 16 hours to attend, had just been canceled. Technical difficulties, they said. Scheduling conflicts, they claimed. Alexander didn't buy it, but he also didn't care enough to argue. He was tired, bone-deep tired. The kind of exhaustion that comes from years of smiling at people you don't trust and shaking hands with those who'd sell you out for a percentage point. He made a decision in under 30 seconds. "Book me on the next flight home," he told his assistant over the phone. "And don't tell anyone I'm coming back early." There was a pause. "Sir, your wife is expecting you Thursday." "Oh, I know what day it is, Rebecca. Just do it." He hung up. 14 hours later, Alexander Whitmore stepped out of a black sedan in front of his estate in the Hamptons. No driver, no security detail, no entourage. Just him, a leather duffel bag, and the strange feeling that he was sneaking into his own life. The estate was massive, 12,000 square feet of modern architecture nestled between manicured gardens and the distant crash of the Atlantic. It was the kind of home that appeared in architecture magazines under headlines like, "Where Power Lives." But to Alexander it had always felt like a museum. Beautiful, cold, untouchable. He walked up the stone pathway, his shoes barely making a sound. The front door was unlocked. Unusual, but not alarming. His wife, Natalie, was probably home. She usually was, these days. Ever since her charity work had slowed down, as she liked to say. Alexander didn't press. He had learned not to ask too many questions about things that didn't directly affect the bottom line. He stepped inside. The foyer was silent. Sunlight filtered through the tall windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Everything looked perfect. Everything always looked perfect. That was the point. But something was wrong. Alexander couldn't name it at first. It was just a feeling, a tightness in his chest, a prickling at the back of his neck. He set his bag down quietly and listened. Voices, faint, coming from the back of the house. He moved toward them, his heartbeat slow and steady. He wasn't afraid. Alexander Whitmore didn't do fear. But he was curious, and maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to realize that curiosity in his own home was a dangerous thing. The voices grew clearer as he approached the kitchen. One was sharp, clipped, laced with something that made his stomach turn. The other was soft, broken, apologetic. He stopped just outside the doorway, and then he heard it. "You are worthless. Do you understand me? Worthless." That voice. He knew that voice. It was his wife's. But it wasn't the version of her voice he knew. This wasn't the woman who laughed at charity galas, who kissed him on the cheek before he left for work, who smiled so effortlessly in front of cameras. This was something else. Something cold. Venomous. Alexander's hand tightened on the doorframe. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Whitmore. I didn't mean to..." "Didn't mean to what? Ruin my morning? Make me look at your pathetic face while I'm trying to enjoy my coffee?" The second voice was trembling, and Alexander knew exactly who it belonged to. Evelyn Grant, 63 years old, black, soft-spoken. The woman who had worked in his family's home since he was 7 years old. The woman who had bandaged his scraped knees when his mother was too busy. The woman who had sat with him in the kitchen late at night when his father's business was failing, telling him stories about strength and resilience and never giving up. The woman who had been more of a mother to him than his own. And now she was standing in his kitchen, being humiliated by the woman he had married. Alexander didn't move. He couldn't. Not yet. Because he needed to see it. He needed to understand what was happening in the shadows of his own life. He leaned forward just enough to see through the doorway. Natalie stood near the island, her back straight, her blonde hair pulled into a flawless bun. She wore a white silk robe and designer slippers, and in her hand was a coffee cup, probably imported, probably expensive, probably something she'd post about later on Instagram with a caption about morning rituals. And in front of her, head bowed, shoulders hunched, stood Evelyn. Her uniform was wrinkled. Her hands were clasped in front of her. She looked smaller than Alexander remembered, older, tired. "I asked you to make my coffee at 7:30, Natalie said, her tone icy. "It's 7:42. Do you know what that tells me, Evelyn?" "I'm sorry, ma'am. It tells me you don't respect my time. It tells me you think your little tasks are more important than mine." "No, ma'am. That's not—" "Don't interrupt me." Evelyn flinched. Alexander felt something crack inside his chest. "You've been here for decades, Evelyn. Decades. And yet you still can't manage to follow simple instructions. I don't know why Alexander insists on keeping you around. Charity, I suppose." Natalie took a sip of her coffee, her eyes never leaving Evelyn's face. "Or maybe he just pities you." Evelyn's lips trembled, but she didn't speak. "You're lucky I'm in a good mood today," Natalie continued. "Otherwise, I'd have you out of this house by noon. Do you understand me?" "Yes, ma'am." "Good. Yes. Now clean up this mess and stay out of my sight." Evelyn nodded. She turned slowly, moving toward the counter where a dish towel lay folded. Her movements were careful, practiced, like she'd done this 1,000 times before, and maybe she had. Alexander's jaw tightened. He stepped into the kitchen. "Natalie," his wife spun around, her eyes wide. For a split second, he saw something flash across her face, panic maybe, or guilt. But it was gone just as quickly, replaced by that familiar, polished smile. "Alexander, oh my God, you're home early." She crossed the room in 3 quick steps, her arms reaching for him. "I didn't know you were—" He didn't move. She stopped. Her smile faltered. Behind her, Evelyn stood frozen, the dish towel clutched in her hands. Her eyes met Alexander's for just a moment, and in them, he saw something that broke him. Shame. Not anger. Not defiance. Just shame. Like she thought she was the one who had done something wrong. Alexander looked back at his wife. "What did you just say to her?" Natalie blinked. "What? Alexander, I don't know what you—" "What did you say to her?" The air in the kitchen went cold. Natalie's smile was gone now. Her eyes narrowed. "I was simply reminding her of her responsibilities, Alexander. She was late with my coffee and Your coffee." "Yes, You humiliated her." "Over coffee." Natalie's expression shifted. The warmth drained from her face, replaced by something sharp, defensive. "I did no such thing. I was firm, yes, but she needs respect." Alexander's voice was low, controlled, but there was a tremor beneath it. "She's been part of this family longer than you have, Natalie. She's the help, Alexander." Silence. Evelyn's shoulders trembled. Alexander stared at his wife, really stared at her, and for the first time in years, he saw her clearly. "Get out," he said quietly. Natalie blinked. "Excuse me?" "Get out of this kitchen." She laughed, a short, incredulous sound. "You can't be serious, this is my house." "No," Alexander said. "It's mine." And with that, everything changed. Natalie's face went pale, then flushed red. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. For a woman who prided herself on never being caught off guard, she looked utterly lost. "Alexander, you're being ridiculous. I don't know what you think you heard, but I heard everything." His voice cut through the air like a blade. "Every word, every insult, every ounce of cruelty you just poured onto someone who has done nothing but serve this family with loyalty and grace." Natalie's jaw tightened. She glanced at Evelyn, who still stood motionless by the counter, and something dark flickered across her expression. "This is between my husband and me, Evelyn. You're dismissed." "No." Alexander's voice stopped Evelyn before she could move. "She stays." Natalie turned back to him, her eyes blazing now. "Alexander, I don't know what's gotten into you, but you're making a scene over nothing. I was simply what? Degrading her, calling her worthless? Threatening her job over a coffee cup that was 12 minutes late?" He took a step forward. "How long has this been going on, Natalie?" "I have no idea what you're talking about." "How long?" The kitchen fell silent except for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of waves crashing against the shore outside. Natalie's hands were clenched at her sides, her perfectly manicured nails digging into her palms. "You're overreacting," she said finally, her voice colder now, calculated. "Evelyn knows how things work in this house. She knows what's expected of her. Don't you, Evelyn?" Evelyn didn't answer. She kept her eyes fixed on the floor, her hand still gripping the dish towel like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Alexander felt something twist in his chest. He'd seen boardroom intimidation. He'd watched CEOs destroy careers with a single sentence. He'd witnessed power plays that would make most people physically ill. But this was different. This was personal. This was cruelty disguised as authority, and it was happening to someone who couldn't fight back. Someone who had wiped his tears when he was 8 years old and his parents forgot his birthday. "Look at me, Evelyn," Alexander said softly. She didn't move. "Evelyn, please." Slowly, painfully, she lifted her head. Her eyes were red-rimmed, glassy with unshed tears. And in them, Alexander saw something that made his stomach turn. Resignation. Like she'd been carrying this weight for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. "How long has she been treating you like this?" he asked gently. Evelyn's lips trembled. She glanced at Natalie, then back at Alexander. "Mr. Whitmore, I don't want to cause any trouble. I should have been more careful with the time. You didn't do anything wrong." "I did. I was late. And Mrs. Whitmore has every right to—" "No." Alexander's voice was firm but kind. "She doesn't. Not like that. Never like that." A tear slipped down Evelyn's cheek. She wiped it away quickly, almost angrily, as if ashamed of her own emotion. Natalie made a sound, something between a scoff and a laugh. "This is absurd. Alexander, you're treating this like some kind of tragedy when it's simply a matter of household management. If you'd been here more often instead of flying around the world making your precious deals, you'd understand how things need to be run." He turned to look at her. Really look at her. The woman he'd married 5 years ago in a ceremony that had been featured in 3 different magazines. The woman who'd smiled at him across candlelit dinners and whispered promises in the dark. The woman he'd thought he knew. "When did you become this person?" he asked quietly. Natalie's expression hardened. "I became the person who keeps your household running while you're off playing king of the world." Someone has to maintain standards, Alexander. Someone has to make sure things are done properly. By humiliating people, by managing them. That's not management, Natalie. That's abuse. The word hung in the air like a grenade. Natalie's face went white, then red again. "How dare you? I have done nothing but support you, stand by your side, represent this family with dignity and grace. In public," Alexander interrupted. "You do all of that in public. But what about here? What about when no one's watching? What about when it's just you and someone who can't defend themselves?" "She can defend herself," Natalie snapped. "She's a grown woman. If she had a problem with how I treat her, she could leave." Alexander felt something cold settle in his chest. Could she? Could she really? Where would she go, Natalie? She's 63 years old. She's been with this family for over 30 years. This is her home, her life, and you know that. You know she's trapped here and you've been using that against her. Natalie's mouth opened, but no words came out. For the first time since he'd walked into the kitchen, she looked genuinely shaken. "I want to know everything," Alexander said, his voice low and steady. "Every incident, every insult, every moment you've made her feel less than human. And I want to hear it from her, not you. Alexander, get out." Natalie stared at him. "You can't be serious. I've never been more serious in my life. Get out of this kitchen. Go upstairs. And don't come back down until I call for you." For a moment he thought she might refuse. He could see the war playing out behind her eyes. Pride versus strategy, anger versus calculation. But Natalie Whitmore hadn't married a billionaire by being stupid. She knew when she'd lost a battle, even if she hadn't yet lost the war. "Fine," she said icily. "But when you're done with this little intervention, we're going to have a very long conversation about boundaries and respect, both of which seem to have disappeared the moment you walked through that door." She turned on her heel and strode out of the kitchen, her silk robe billowing behind her like a war flag. Her footsteps echoed through the house, followed by the sharp slam of a door somewhere upstairs. And then there was silence. Alexander let out a breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He turned back to Evelyn, who was still standing by the counter, looking smaller and more fragile than he'd ever seen her. "Evelyn," he said softly, "please, sit down." She shook her head quickly. "No, Mr. Whitmore, I shouldn't. I need to finish." "Sit down." It wasn't a command. It was a plea. She hesitated, then slowly, carefully, lowered herself into one of the kitchen chairs. She kept her hands folded in her lap, her back straight, her eyes down. Even sitting, she looked like she was ready to jump up and run at any moment. Alexander pulled out the chair across from her and sat down. The kitchen felt enormous suddenly. Too big, too cold, too full of things that didn't matter. "I need you to tell me the truth," he said. "All of it. And I need you to know that nothing you say will get you in trouble. Do you understand?" Evelyn's throat worked. "Mr. Whitmore, I really don't think—" "How long?" She closed her eyes. A tear rolled down her cheek, and this time she didn't wipe it away. 3 years, she whispered. Alexander felt the air leave his lungs. 3 years. He'd been married to Natalie for 5, which meant for more than half their marriage, his wife had been systematically tormenting the woman who'd raised him. "Tell me," he said. "Please, I need to know." Evelyn opened her eyes. They were swimming with tears now, and her hands trembled in her lap. "It started small," she said, her voice barely audible. "Little comments, little corrections. I thought maybe she was just particular. You know how some people are. They like things done a certain way." Alexander nodded, not trusting himself to speak. But then it got worse. She'd find reasons to be angry. Coffee too hot, too cold. Dinner served 5 minutes late. A towel folded the wrong way, and every time she'd say things. Tell me I was incompetent, stupid, that you kept me around out of pity. Evelyn's voice broke. That I was lucky to have a roof over my head. Jesus, Alexander breathed. I tried to do better. I tried so hard, Mr. Whitmore. I'd get up earlier, double-check everything, make sure it was all perfect. But it was never enough. There was always something wrong, always something to criticize. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. And the worst part, I started believing her, started thinking maybe she was right. Maybe I was worthless. Maybe I was just taking up space. Alexander's hands clenched into fists on the table. Why didn't you tell me? Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something that made him feel ashamed. When would I have told you, Mr. Whitmore? You're gone 6 days a week. When you are here, you're in meetings or on calls. And when you do walk through that door, you're tired. The last thing you need is to hear about household problems. You're not a household problem, Evelyn. You're family. She smiled sadly. Am I? Because your wife doesn't seem to think so. And she's the one who's here. Every day. All day. The truth of it hit Alexander like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on building his empire, on closing deals and expanding markets, that he'd completely missed what was happening in his own home. He'd trusted Natalie to manage things, to take care of the household, and she'd used that trust as a weapon. I'm sorry, he said, and his voice cracked. God, Evelyn, I'm so sorry. I should have seen it, I should have known. It's not your fault. Yes, it is. This is my house, my responsibility, and I let this happen to you. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. But it ends now. Today. Do you understand me? It ends today. Evelyn's eyes filled with fresh tears. Mr. Whitmore, you can't fight with your wife over me. I'm not worth— Don't. His voice was sharp and she flinched. He softened immediately. Don't say that. Don't ever say that. You are worth everything, Evelyn. You have more value in your little finger than most people I know have in their entire bodies. He reached across the table and gently took her hand. You raised me. You were there when no one else was. You are family. And I will not let anyone, treat you like this. Not even my wife. Evelyn's composure finally shattered. She broke down, her shoulders shaking with sobs, and Alexander moved around the table to kneel beside her chair. He put his arms around her and she cried into his shoulder the way she used to let him cry into hers when he was a boy. It's okay, he whispered. I've got you. I've got you now. And as he held her, Alexander Whitmore made a decision. Some things were more valuable than peace. Some things were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. And he was about to show his wife exactly what happened when you pushed a good man too far. The sun had shifted by the time Evelyn's tears finally subsided. Alexander helped her to her feet, guided her to the living room, and made her sit on the leather couch, the one Natalie always said was too expensive for staff. He brought her water, tissues, and stayed with her until her breathing steadied and the trembling in her hands began to fade. I want you to take the rest of the day off, he said gently. Go to your room. Rest. Don't worry about anything. I'll handle dinner. I'll handle everything. Evelyn shook her head weakly. Mr. Whitmore, I can't just— Yes, you can, and you will. His tone left no room for argument. This is not a request, Evelyn. It's an order from your employer, and for once, I'm pulling rank. A ghost of a smile crossed her face. You never pull rank. Then it's about time I started. He squeezed her hand. Go, please. I need to deal with some things, and I need to know you're safe and resting while I do. She nodded slowly, then stood. She looked at him for a long moment, and he could see the question in her eyes. What are you going to do? He didn't answer. He didn't know if he could put it into words yet. Evelyn walked toward the staff quarters, her steps slow and careful, like she was afraid the floor might give way beneath her. Alexander watched until she disappeared down the hallway, and then he stood alone in the living room of his multi-million-dollar estate, feeling poorer than he'd ever felt in his life. He pulled out his phone and made a call. Rebecca, I need you to do something for me. His assistant's voice came through crisp and efficient. Of course, Mr. Whitmore. What do you need? I need you to pull every financial record related to household expenses for the past 3 years. Credit card statements, wire transfers, cash withdrawals, everything that went through accounts associated with Natalie or the household management. There was a pause. Sir, may I ask why? No. Understood. I'll have it to you by tonight. Good. And Rebecca? This stays between us. No one else sees these records. Not the accountant. Not the lawyers. No one. Yes, sir. He hung up and stood there for a moment, his mind working through possibilities, strategies, outcomes. Alexander Whitmore hadn't built a fortune by being impulsive. Every move he made was calculated, measured, designed to achieve maximum impact with minimum waste. But this wasn't business. This was personal, and he was about to treat it exactly like a hostile takeover. He found Natalie in the master bedroom, sitting at her vanity, applying makeup with the kind of precision that suggested she'd been doing it for the past hour. She didn't look at him when he entered, didn't acknowledge him at all, just kept sweeping mascara across her lashes like nothing had happened. We need to talk, Alexander said. I have nothing to say to you right now. That's fine. You can listen. She set down the mascara wand with a sharp click and turned to face him. Her expression was ice. If you've come up here to lecture me about employee relations, Alexander, save your breath. I've already heard enough. I'm not here to lecture you. I'm here to tell you how this is going to work. Something flickered in her eyes. Uncertainty, maybe. Or the first hint of real concern. Excuse me? Alexander walked to the window, his hands in his pockets, his back to her. You're going to apologize to Evelyn. A real apology. Not some half-hearted, I'm sorry you feel that way nonsense. A genuine acknowledgement of what you've done to her. Natalie laughed. Actually laughed. Are you out of your mind? I'm not apologizing to the help. Then you're leaving. The laughter died. Alexander turned to face her. I'm giving you a choice, Natalie. You can apologize, commit to changing your behavior, and we can try to move forward from this. Or you can pack your things and be out of this house by the end of the week. Those are your options. She stared at him like he'd grown a second head. You're threatening me with divorce over a maid? I'm giving you an ultimatum over the fact that you've been systematically abusing someone under my protection. Someone I care about. Someone who has been part of my life far longer than you have. She's an employee, Alexander. Not family. She's more family than you've ever been. The words landed like a slap. Natalie's face went white, then red, and for a moment Alexander thought she might actually throw something at him. But she was too controlled for that, too aware of how things looked, even behind closed doors. You have no idea what you're doing, she said, her voice low and dangerous. Do you know what people will say if you divorce me over this? Do you know how it will look? I don't care. Yes, you do. You care about your reputation, your image, your precious company's stock price. All of it will take a hit if you make this public. Then I'll take the hit. She stood up, her hands clenched at her sides. You're being emotional. Irrational. You just got off a 16-hour flight, you're jet-lagged. You walked in on something you didn't understand. I understood perfectly. No, you didn't. You don't know what it's like to manage a household like this. You don't know the pressure, the expectations, the constant need to maintain standards. I have to be firm, Alexander. I have to be strict. Otherwise, everything falls apart. There's a difference between being firm and being cruel. You crossed that line a long time ago. Natalie's jaw tightened. She's been poisoning you against me. Can't you see that? The moment you showed her a little sympathy, she played the victim. She's manipulating you. The only person manipulating anyone here is you. I have given everything to this marriage. I've stood beside you at every event, smiled at every boring dinner party, played the perfect wife while you built your empire. And this is how you repay me? By taking her side? Her side? Alexander shook his head slowly. There shouldn't be sides, Natalie. There should just be basic human decency. But you've turned this house into a battlefield, and you've been fighting a war against someone who couldn't fight back. She could have quit. Where would she go? She's 63 years old with no family, no savings beyond what we pay her. You knew she was trapped, and you used it against her. That's not strength, Natalie. That's cowardice. She flinched like he'd struck her. I want your answer by tomorrow morning, Alexander said. Apologize and change or leave. Those are your options. And if I choose neither, then I'll make the choice for you, and trust me, you won't like the outcome. He turned and walked toward the door. Alexander. He stopped, but didn't turn around. If you do this, Natalie said, her voice trembling now, with rage or fear, he couldn't tell. If you humiliate me like this, I will make sure you regret it. I'll take you for everything you're worth. I'll drag your name through every tabloid, every gossip column, every social media platform until there's nothing left of your precious reputation. Do you understand me? Alexander looked back at her over his shoulder. I understand that you think money and reputation are the most important things in the world, but you're wrong. Some things matter more, and it took me too long to remember that. He walked out and closed the door behind him. That evening, Alexander sat in his study with a glass of whiskey he didn't drink and a stack of financial documents he couldn't stop reading. Rebecca had delivered as promised. 3 years of household expenses, all organized, categorized, and highlighted in ways that made his blood run cold. Natalie had been spending money, a lot of money, on things that had nothing to do with household management. Designer clothes, $847,000 over 3 years. Jewelry, $312,000. Spa treatments and cosmetic procedures, $156,000. And then there were the charges that made his stomach turn. Payments to a personal shopper, a stylist, a social media consultant, all things she'd told him were necessary for maintaining appearances. But what caught his attention most were the cash withdrawals. Large ones, regular ones, always on the same day of the month, always in amounts just under the threshold that would trigger automatic reporting. $9,500 every month for 3 years. Over $340,000 in cash with no explanation, no receipts, no record of where it went. Alexander leaned back in his chair and stared at the ceiling. He'd built his fortune by paying attention to patterns, by seeing things other people missed. And this was a pattern that screamed deception. He picked up his phone and called his head of security. Marcus, I need you to look into something for me. Quietly. What do you need, boss? I need to know where my wife goes during the day, who she meets, what she does. And I need you to trace where a series of cash withdrawals went. Can you do that without attracting attention? Consider it done. Marcus, this stays between us. Always does. Alexander hung up and finally took a sip of his whiskey. It burned going down, but not as much as the truth that was starting to take shape in his mind. He'd thought he was dealing with a wife who'd been cruel to his housekeeper, but he was beginning to realize he was dealing with something much bigger, something that went beyond insults and power plays. Natalie Whitmore had secrets, and Alexander was about to uncover every single one of them. Upstairs, in the master bedroom, Natalie sat on the edge of the bed with her phone pressed to her ear. Her hands were shaking. He knows, she whispered. He heard everything. He's threatening divorce. The voice on the other end was male, smooth, unconcerned. Then we move up the timeline. What if he finds out about... He won't. You've been careful. We've been careful. Just stick to the plan, Natalie. In 6 months, you'll walk away with half of everything he owns and we can finally be together. He's not going to just let me go. You don't know Alexander. When he sets his mind on something, then you need to make sure his mind is on something else. Distract him. Give him a reason to doubt himself. Play the victim. You're good at that. Natalie closed her eyes. What about the maid? What about her? He's protecting her. He called her family. There was a pause. Then maybe it's time she had an accident. Natalie's eyes snapped open. What? No, we can't. Relax. I'm not talking about anything permanent. Just something that makes her look unstable, unreliable, something that makes Alexander question whether she's been telling him the truth. I don't know. Do you want the money or not? Natalie swallowed hard. I want the money. Then trust me. I'll handle it. You just keep your husband distracted. The line went dead. Natalie sat there in the dark, staring at her reflection in the vanity mirror. And for the first time in 3 years, she felt afraid, because she'd married a man who built empires, and she'd just declared war on him. Morning came too quickly. Alexander hadn't slept. He'd spent the night in his study, going through documents, making notes, building a case the way he would for any major acquisition. Except this time, he wasn't acquiring anything. He was protecting someone. And the more he dug, the more he realized just how deep Natalie's deception ran. At 6:47 a.m., his phone buzzed. "Marcus, I've got something. You're not going to like it." Alexander sat up straighter. "Talk to me. Your wife has been meeting with someone, a man named Derek Castellano, real estate developer, recently divorced, owns a condo in Tribeca. They've been seeing each other at least twice a week for the past 8 months. Always the same hotel, always between 2 and 5 in the afternoon." Alexander's grip tightened on the phone. "Are you sure? I've got photos, timestamps, credit card receipts. She's been using cash for the hotel rooms, but she's not as careful as she thinks. There's security footage." The room seemed to tilt slightly. Alexander had suspected financial impropriety, maybe some questionable spending habits, but infidelity? He hadn't let himself consider it, hadn't wanted to. "What about the cash withdrawals?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Most of it went to him. Castellano's been having financial trouble. His last 2 development projects failed. He's leveraged to the neck, creditors circling. The way it looks, she's been funneling your money to keep him afloat. Alexander closed his eyes. $340,000. His money, used to support his wife's lover while she lived in his house, slept in his bed, and tormented the one person who'd shown him genuine love. "Send me everything," he said quietly. "Already in your encrypted email. Boss? I'm sorry. Don't be. You did your job. Thank you, Marcus." He hung up and sat in the silence of his study as the sun rose over the Atlantic. The light filtered through the windows, painting everything gold, making the room look warm and inviting. But Alexander felt cold. He felt like he'd been cold for years and was only just now realizing it. His marriage was a lie. His wife was a stranger. And the only real family he had was a 63-year-old woman who'd been suffering in silence while he was too blind to see it. He stood up, straightened his tie, and walked out of the study with the grim determination of a man who'd just decided to burn everything down and rebuild from the ashes. Evelyn was already in the kitchen when he arrived. She looked up, startled as he entered. "Mr. Whitmore, I was just preparing breakfast." "I didn't think you'd be up so—" "Sit down, Evelyn." She froze. "Sir, please, sit down. We need to talk." The worry in her eyes nearly broke him. Even after everything, she still thought she'd done something wrong, still thought she was the one in trouble. She lowered herself into a chair, her hands folded in her lap, her posture perfect even in her fear. Alexander sat across from her. "I need you to listen to me very carefully. What I'm about to tell you is going to sound extreme. It might even sound cruel, but I need you to trust that everything I'm doing is to protect you. Can you do that?" "Yes, sir. My wife has been stealing from me. She's been having an affair, and she's been using my money to support her lover while simultaneously making your life a living hell." He paused, watching her face. "I'm going to divorce her, but more than that, I'm going to make sure she never has the power to hurt you or anyone else again." Evelyn's eyes widened. "Mr. Whitmore, you can't destroy your marriage because of me. I'm not worth—" "Stop." His voice was gentle but firm. "We're not having that conversation again. You are worth everything. And this isn't just about you anymore. This is about the kind of man I want to be. The kind of man I thought I was, but clearly wasn't." Tears welled in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" "Whatever it takes." He reached across the table and took her hand. "But I need something from you first. I need you to tell me if she's ever threatened you. Physically, I mean. Or if she's ever done anything that made you fear for your safety." Evelyn hesitated. There was one time, about 6 months ago. She was angry about something. I don't even remember what. She picked up a coffee mug and threw it. It shattered against the wall, right next to my head. Alexander's jaw clenched. "Did she hurt you?" "No. But there was glass everywhere. She made me clean it up, and then she said—" Evelyn's voice dropped to a whisper. "She said that if I ever told you anything about how she treated me, she'd make sure I ended up on the street with nothing. She said no one would believe a black maid over a white woman married to a billionaire." The rage that swept through Alexander was cold and precise. The kind of rage that didn't explode. It calculated. It planned. It executed. She was wrong, he said quietly. I believe you, and I'm going to make sure everyone else does too. At 9 a.m., Alexander's lawyer arrived at the estate. Catherine Morris was a shark in designer heels, the kind of attorney who'd built her reputation destroying prenups and dismantling fortunes. But today she was working for Alexander. They met in his study. Alexander handed her a folder containing everything Marcus had found, plus 3 years of financial records and a written statement from Evelyn detailing the abuse. Catherine reviewed it all in silence, her expression growing darker with each page. Finally, she looked up. This is airtight. If we move now, we can have her out of this house and served with papers before the end of the day. The adultery alone violates the morality clause in your prenup. She gets nothing, not a dime. I want more than that. Catherine raised an eyebrow. More? I want a restraining order. I want it stipulated that she can never contact Evelyn again. I want her signing an NDA that prevents her from speaking about Evelyn to anyone, including the press. And I want her to know that if she violates any of these terms, I will prosecute her for embezzlement and fraud. We can do that. But Alexander, you need to understand, this is going to get ugly. She'll fight. She'll try to spin this in the press. You need to be prepared for your name to be dragged through the mud. Let her try. I have the truth, and I have evidence. Catherine smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. Then let's burn her world down. Natalie was having brunch on the terrace when Alexander found her. She looked radiant in a white sundress, her hair perfectly styled, a mimosa in her hand. She could have been posing for a magazine cover, the billionaire's perfect wife. The illusion shattered the moment she saw his face. Alexander, I was hoping we could talk rationally this morning. Last night was Derek Castellano. She went completely still. The mimosa glass trembled in her hand. How long were you going to keep lying to me, Natalie? How long did you think you could get away with it? I don't know what I have photos, timestamps, credit card receipts. I know about the affair. I know about the money. I know everything. The color drained from her face. For a moment, she looked like she might faint. Then something hardened in her expression. Something desperate and dangerous. You had me followed. I had my assets protected. There's a difference. She stood up, the mimosa forgotten on the table. You have no idea what you've done. Derek and I are in love. Real love. Not this cold, empty arrangement we call a marriage. Empty? Alexander laughed, but there was no humor in it. Our marriage was empty because you made it that way. You took my trust, my money, my home, and you twisted all of it into something ugly. And the worst part? You did it while torturing someone who couldn't fight back. Oh, spare me the saint routine. You didn't care about that maid until yesterday. You barely knew she existed. You're right. The admission seemed to surprise her. I didn't pay enough attention. I was too focused on work, on success, on building something that didn't matter nearly as much as I thought it did. But I'm paying attention now, and what I see is someone I don't recognize, someone I don't think I ever really knew. Natalie's expression shifted. The desperation gave way to calculation. If you divorce me, I'll tell everyone about your precious Evelyn. I'll say she was stealing from us. I'll say you were having an affair with her. I'll destroy both of you. No, you won't. Watch me. You won't, because if you try, I'll release every piece of evidence I have to every media outlet in the country. Your affair, your embezzlement, the abuse, all of it. And then, I'll press charges. You'll be lucky if you don't end up in prison, Natalie. So here's what's actually going to happen. He pulled a document from his jacket pocket and placed it on the table. You're going to sign this. It's a settlement agreement. You leave this house today. You take nothing except your personal belongings and your car. You sign an NDA regarding Evelyn, and you stay at least 500 feet away from her at all times. You never contact her, never speak about her, never even think about her. And in return, I don't destroy you. Natalie stared at the document like it was a snake. And if I refuse, then I'll see you in court. And trust me, I have far better lawyers than Derek can afford. Her hands were shaking now. I gave you 5 years of my life. You gave me 5 years of lies. There's a difference. She picked up the document, her eyes scanning the terms. Alexander could see the moment she realized she'd lost. The moment the fantasy of walking away with half his fortune evaporated into nothing. I loved you, she said, and for the first time she sounded genuine. In the beginning, I really did. Maybe you did, but love doesn't excuse cruelty, and it doesn't justify what you did to Evelyn. Natalie's jaw tightened. She grabbed a pen from the table and signed the document with quick, angry strokes. Then she threw the pen down and looked at him with pure hatred. "You're going to regret this. The only thing I regret is not seeing you for what you were sooner." She turned and walked into the house. Alexander could hear her footsteps echoing through the halls, could hear doors slamming, drawers being pulled open, the sounds of a life being hastily packed and discarded. Catherine emerged from inside the house where she'd been waiting. That went better than expected. "It's not over yet. It is for her." She signed. "She's done." Alexander nodded slowly. "Make sure she's escorted off the property. And Catherine? Thank you. That's what you pay me for. But for what it's worth," she looked at him with something like respect, "you did the right thing." 2 hours later, Natalie's car disappeared down the long driveway, packed with designer luggage and the remnants of a life that had never been as perfect as it looked. Alexander watched from the window of his study, feeling nothing. No satisfaction, no vindication. Just a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. He found Evelyn in the library, dusting shelves that didn't need dusting. Old habits. "She's gone," he said softly. Evelyn turned, her eyes wide. "Gone? Mr. Whitmore, what did you—" "She signed the papers. The divorce will be final in a few months, and she can't come near you ever again. It's in writing. Legally binding." Evelyn's hands flew to her mouth. "Oh my God. You're safe now, truly safe, and I'm going to make sure you stay that way." She started crying then, deep, wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and wounded. Alexander crossed the room and pulled her into his arms, and they stood there in the library, surrounded by books and afternoon light, as she cried out years of fear and pain and humiliation. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, thank you, thank you." "No," Alexander said. "Thank you, for staying, for enduring, for being stronger than anyone should ever have to be." When she finally pulled back, her eyes were red but clearer than he'd seen them in days. "What happens now?" Alexander smiled. Now we start over. Both of us." But in a condo in Tribeca, Natalie sat on Derek Castellano's couch with her phone in her hand and rage in her heart. She'd lost the battle, but the war wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She began typing a message to a contact she'd sworn she'd never use. Someone who could hurt Alexander in ways a divorce never could. Someone who knew how to destroy a man's reputation so thoroughly that no amount of money could repair it. If Alexander wanted to play hero, fine. She'd show him what happened to heroes who forgot that every villain has a backup plan. 3 days passed in a strange kind of peace. Alexander worked from home, something he hadn't done in years. He answered emails from the terrace, took conference calls from the study, and for the first time in what felt like forever, he noticed the small details of his own life, the way the morning light hit the garden, the sound of the ocean through the open windows, the smell of Evelyn's cooking drifting through the house, a smell he'd taken for granted for 30 years. She was different now, still quiet, still respectful, but there was something in her posture that hadn't been there before. She stood a little straighter, met his eyes when she spoke, smiled more easily. It was like watching someone slowly remember who they used to be before the weight of fear crushed them into silence. On the third morning, Alexander found her in the kitchen making breakfast. Eggs, toast, fresh coffee. She looked up as he entered, and for the first time she didn't immediately apologize for something. "Good morning, Mr. Whitmore." "Good morning, Evelyn. And please, call me Alexander. Mr. Whitmore makes me feel like my father." She smiled but shook her head. "Old habits. You know how it is." He poured himself coffee and sat at the kitchen island. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you stay? All those years, even when it got bad, why didn't you leave?" Evelyn was quiet for a moment, her hands busy with the eggs in the pan. When she spoke, her voice was soft but steady. "Because this was home. The only real home I've ever had. My parents died when I was young. I went into service because it was all I knew. And then I came here to your family and your mother, God rest her. She treated me with kindness, with respect. And you." She glanced at him. "You were just a little boy who needed someone to see him." "What do you mean? Your parents were always so busy. Building the business, attending events, maintaining their image. You were lonely. I could see it. So I made sure you knew that at least one person in this house saw you. Really saw you." Alexander felt something tighten in his chest. "I never thanked you for that. You didn't need to. That's not why I did it." She plated the eggs and set them in front of him. "I stayed because you became like a son to me. And you don't abandon family no matter how hard things get." He looked up at her, this woman who'd given him more love than his own parents ever had, and felt the full weight of how badly he'd failed her. "I'm sorry I didn't protect you sooner. You're protecting me now. That's what matters. They ate breakfast together in comfortable silence, and for the first time in years, Alexander felt like he was actually home. That afternoon, his phone rang. It was Catherine Morris. "We have a problem." Alexander's stomach dropped. What kind of problem? Natalie's retained a PR firm, not a legal team. A PR firm. The kind that specializes in reputation management and media spin. They've already started reaching out to outlets. Planting stories. What kind of stories? The kind that paint her as the victim of a controlling billionaire who isolated her from her friends, monitored her every move, and ultimately discarded her for a younger woman. Alexander nearly laughed. A younger woman? I'm not seeing anyone. They're claiming the affair was with Evelyn. The coffee in his mouth turned to ash. He set down his cup very carefully. What did you just say? They're spinning a narrative that you've been romantically involved with your housekeeper for years. That Natalie discovered the affair and confronted you, and you retaliated by threatening her with divorce and forcing her to sign an NDA. They're making you look like a predator and making her look like a whistleblower. That's insane. Evelyn is 63 years old. She's like a mother to me. Anyone who knows me would know. Most people don't know you, Alexander. They know the headlines, they know the image. And right now, the image they're selling is a lot more interesting than the truth. He stood up and started pacing. Can we counter it? Can we release the evidence? We could, but that means making everything public. The affair with Castellano, the financial records, the abuse allegations, everything. And if we do that, Evelyn becomes the center of a media circus. Her name, her face, her entire life gets dissected by strangers on the internet. Is that really what you want for her? Alexander closed his eyes. No. Then we need to play this carefully. We need to get ahead of the narrative without exposing Evelyn to unnecessary trauma. How? Let me handle the strategy. But Alexander, brace yourself. This is going to get worse before it gets better. She hung up. Alexander stood alone in his study, staring out at the ocean, and felt the familiar sensation of walls closing in. He'd spent his entire career controlling narratives, managing perceptions, staying 3 steps ahead of his competitors. But this wasn't business. This was personal, and personal fights didn't follow the same rules. He thought about Evelyn, about the peace she'd finally found after years of suffering, and he thought about what would happen if the media turned her into a spectacle, if her name and face ended up on tabloid covers and gossip websites, if people who'd never met her decided they had the right to judge her entire life based on lies someone else told. He couldn't let that happen, which meant he needed to go on the offensive. That evening, Alexander called a meeting with his inner circle, Catherine, Marcus, and his head of communications, a sharp-minded woman named Lisa Chen, who'd helped him navigate more than one PR crisis. They gathered in his study. Alexander laid out the situation, and Lisa listened with the kind of focus that made her one of the best in the business. When he finished, she leaned back in her chair. Okay, here's what we're dealing with. Natalie's team is good, but they're playing a predictable game. Victim narrative, emotional appeal, vague insinuations that trigger people's imagination but don't make specific claims we can easily disprove. It's classic reputation warfare. How do we fight it? Alexander asked. We don't. Not directly. Lisa pulled out her tablet and started making notes. If we respond with facts and evidence, we look defensive, like we're trying too hard to prove something. Instead, we control the story by telling a different one. What story? The story of a man who discovered abuse in his own home and took action to stop it. We don't mention Natalie by name, we don't engage with the affair rumors. We frame this as a story about workplace dignity, about protecting vulnerable employees, about doing the right thing even when it's hard. Catherine nodded slowly. That could work, but we'd need someone credible to tell it, someone people will believe. We have that someone, Marcus said quietly. Everyone turned to look at him. Evelyn. Alexander shook his head immediately. No, absolutely not. I'm not putting her in front of cameras. You don't have to. We film an interview here, at the house. Intimate, personal, just her telling her story in her own words. We control the environment. We control the message. And most importantly, we control who she's talking to. Lisa's eyes lit up. That's actually brilliant. If we get the right interviewer, someone known for serious journalism, not tabloid gossip, and we let Evelyn speak her truth without sensationalism, it completely undercuts Natalie's narrative. People will see her, really see her, and once they do, the lies fall apart. But what if she doesn't want to? Alexander asked. What if this is too much? She's already been through hell. Then we find another way, Catherine said. But Alexander, you need to at least ask her. Give her the choice. That's more respect than Natalie ever showed her. He sat with that for a moment, then nodded. I'll talk to her. But if she says no, that's the end of it. We find a different strategy. Fair enough. He found Evelyn in the library that evening, reading a worn copy of Maya Angelou. She looked up as he entered, and he could see the question in her eyes. She'd always been able to read him even when he tried to hide things. Something's wrong, she said. It wasn't a question. Alexander sat down across from her. Natalie is spreading lies about us, about me, about you. Evelyn closed the book carefully. What kind of lies? He told her everything. The PR firm, the narrative they were building, the insinuations about their relationship. When he finished, Evelyn was silent for a long time. I see, she said finally. My team thinks the best way to counter it is for you to tell your story, your real story, on camera, to an interviewer we trust. But Evelyn, I need you to understand. You don't have to do this. If it's too much, if you don't want to relive all of that publicly, we'll find another way. She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw something he hadn't expected. Strength. Not the kind of strength that comes from never being hurt, but the kind that comes from being hurt and choosing to stand up anyway. Will it help? She asked. It might, but there are risks. People will know your name, your face. They'll have opinions about you, about your life, and some of those opinions won't be kind. People have had unkind opinions about me my entire life, Mr. Whitmore. I'm a black woman who spent 40 years in service. I've heard every slur, every insult, every whispered comment people thought I couldn't hear. I've survived all of it. I can survive this too. You shouldn't have to. No, I shouldn't. But if telling my story means she can't hurt anyone else the way she hurt me, then it's worth it. She straightened her shoulders. I'll do it. Are you sure? I'm sure. Besides, she said with a small smile, someone once told me that I'm worth fighting for. Maybe it's time I believe that. Alexander felt his throat tighten. You're one of the bravest people I've ever known. I'm not brave. I'm just tired of being invisible. 2 days later, a film crew arrived at the estate. Not a big production, just a cameraman, a sound technician, and the interviewer Lisa had chosen. A journalist named Sarah Mitchell who'd built her reputation on sensitive, thoughtful reporting about social justice issues. They set up in the living room, soft lighting, comfortable chairs, everything designed to make Evelyn feel as safe as possible. Alexander stayed close but out of frame, watching as Sarah began the interview. Thank you for speaking with me today, Evelyn, Sarah said gently. I know this isn't easy. Why don't we start at the beginning? How long have you worked for the Whitmore family? Evelyn took a breath. 36 years. I started when Alexander was 7 years old. And what was that like? It was good. His parents, his mother especially, they treated me with respect. I wasn't just staff to them. I was part of the household, part of the family in a way. And Alexander? What was he like as a child? A smile crossed Evelyn's face. Curious, intelligent, lonely, I think. His parents were always working, always busy, so I tried to be there for him, to make sure he knew someone cared. It sounds like you developed a close relationship. We did. He was like a son to me, still is. Sarah leaned forward slightly. Can you tell me what changed? When did things start to become difficult? Evelyn's expression shifted. The smile faded. About 3 years ago, after Alexander got married, his wife Natalie. Yes. What was she like? At first, she was charming, polite. She'd smile at me, thank me for my work. But once the cameras were gone, once it was just us, Evelyn paused, choosing her words carefully. She was different. Cold. Critical. Nothing I did was ever good enough. Can you give me an example? Coffee served 12 minutes late. A towel folded the wrong way. A dish that wasn't exactly how she wanted it. She'd find reasons to be angry. And when she was angry, Evelyn's voice wavered. She'd say things. What kind of things? That I was worthless. That I was lucky to have a job. That Alexander only kept me around out of pity. A tear rolled down Evelyn's cheek. That no one would believe a black maid over a white woman married to a billionaire. Sarah's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Did you ever feel afraid? Every day. I was afraid that if I made a mistake, I'd lose my home, my job, everything I'd worked for. I was 60 years old with nowhere else to go, so I stayed, and I tried to be invisible. What changed? Evelyn looked directly into the camera. Alexander came home early one day. He heard her, he saw what was happening, and he didn't look away. What did he do? He stood up for me. He told her it wasn't acceptable. And when she wouldn't stop, when she wouldn't change, he asked her to leave. That must have taken tremendous courage. It wasn't courage. It was decency. It was someone finally seeing me as a person who mattered. Evelyn wiped her eyes. For 3 years I felt invisible. I felt like I didn't matter, like my life was worth less than a cup of coffee or a folded towel. But Alexander reminded me that I'm more than that I've always been more than that. Sarah was quiet for a moment. There are people who are suggesting that you and Alexander have an inappropriate relationship. How do you respond to that? Evelyn looked directly at the camera, her voice steady and clear. Those people are lying. Alexander Whitmore is like a son to me. I raised him. I loved him like family when his own parents were too busy to notice he existed. What we have is respect, trust, love, but the kind of love that exists between a mother and child, not whatever ugly thing people are trying to turn it into. And the woman spreading these rumors, she's trying to distract from her own behavior, from the cruelty she showed not just to me, but to anyone she thought was beneath her. Evelyn's voice hardened slightly. I may be a maid, I may be black, I may be old, but I am not less human than she is, and I refuse to be silent anymore. The interview aired 3 days later on a major news network. Within hours, it had been viewed over 2 million times. Within 24 hours, it was trending on every social media platform. And within 48 hours, Natalie Whitmore's narrative had completely collapsed. People weren't talking about an affair or a controlling billionaire. They were talking about Evelyn, about her dignity, her strength, her quiet refusal to be erased. The hashtag #IStandWithEvelyn went viral. Celebrities shared the interview. News outlets ran follow-up stories. And suddenly, the conversation wasn't about Alexander Whitmore's marriage. It was about workplace abuse, dignity, and the way society treats people in service positions. Natalie's PR firm went silent. Derek Castellano issued a statement distancing himself from recent events. And in the court of public opinion, the verdict was clear. Alexander sat in his study, watching the response unfold on his laptop, and felt something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. Not for himself, for Evelyn, for the possibility that maybe, just maybe, telling the truth actually mattered. His phone buzzed. Catherine, have you seen the news? I'm watching it now. Alexander, this is unprecedented. The way people are responding, it's not just sympathy, it's solidarity. You've started something bigger than a divorce case. Evelyn started it. She's the one who had the courage to speak. And you're the one who gave her the platform. Don't downplay what you did. He hung up and walked to the library where Evelyn sat reading messages on a tablet Lisa had given her. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide. There are thousands of them, she whispered. Messages from people I've never met, telling me I'm brave, telling me I matter, telling me their own stories. Alexander sat beside her. You've given people permission to speak their truth. That's powerful. I'm scared, she admitted. What if this becomes too big? What if I can't handle it? Then we'll handle it together. You're not alone anymore, Evelyn. You'll never be alone again. She reached out and squeezed his hand. And in that moment, surrounded by books and afternoon light and the sound of the ocean in the distance, Alexander Whitmore realized something important. He'd spent his life building an empire. But this, protecting someone who couldn't protect themselves, standing up for what was right even when it cost him everything, this was the first thing he'd ever built that actually mattered. 6 months later, the courthouse in downtown Manhattan was packed with reporters, cameras, and spectators who'd lined up before dawn just to get a seat in the gallery. The Whitmore divorce had become more than a legal proceeding. It had become a cultural moment, a referendum on power, privilege, and the invisible people who kept the machinery of wealth running smoothly. Alexander sat at the plaintiff's table with Catherine beside him, both dressed in immaculate business attire. Across the aisle, Natalie sat with her legal team, smaller now, less expensive, funded by whatever remained of Derek Castellano's rapidly dwindling resources. She looked different, thinner, harder. The polished veneer she'd always worn had cracked, revealing something brittle underneath. She wouldn't look at Alexander. Hadn't looked at him since the interview aired and her world imploded. The judge entered, a stern woman in her 60s named Judge Patricia Vance, known for her no-nonsense approach and her intolerance for games. Everyone stood, then sat again as she settled behind the bench. I've reviewed all the materials submitted by both parties, Judge Vance said, her voice cutting through the murmur of the crowd. I've read the depositions, examined the financial records, and watched the interviews. This is an unusual case in many respects, but the facts are relatively straightforward. She looked at Natalie. Mrs. Whitmore, you engaged in an extramarital affair, misappropriated marital funds to support your paramour, and, most troublingly, engaged in a pattern of workplace abuse that violated both the spirit and letter of employment law. Your attempt to reframe this narrative as something other than what it clearly was has not been successful. Natalie's lawyer started to stand, but Judge Vance held up a hand. I'm not interested in objections at this stage. The evidence speaks for itself. She turned to Alexander. Mr. Whitmore, you have demonstrated that your wife materially breached the terms of your prenuptial agreement. The morality clause is clear, and her behavior constitutes multiple violations. Therefore, I am granting your petition for divorce on the grounds stated. A ripple of sound moved through the courtroom. Catherine's hand tightened briefly on Alexander's arm, a silent message of victory. Furthermore, Judge Vance continued, I am upholding the settlement agreement Mrs. Whitmore signed. She will receive no financial settlement beyond what was already stipulated, which I note is nothing. The restraining order protecting Ms. Evelyn Grant will remain in effect indefinitely. Any violation will result in immediate legal consequences. Natalie's face had gone pale. Her lawyer was whispering urgently in her ear, but she wasn't listening. She was staring straight ahead, her expression frozen. Mrs. Whitmore, do you have anything you'd like to say before I finalize this decree? Judge Vance asked. For a moment, Alexander thought she wouldn't respond. Then slowly, Natalie stood. Her hands gripped the table in front of her. I have one question, she said, her voice rough. For Alexander. Judge Vance frowned. This is highly irregular. Please. Just one question. The judge looked at Alexander. Mr. Whitmore? He nodded slowly and stood as well. Natalie finally looked at him. Really looked at him. And in her eyes he saw something he hadn't expected. Genuine confusion. Was I ever anything more to you than an accessory? Than someone who looked good at parties and smiled for cameras? Alexander was quiet for a long moment. The entire courtroom held its breath. In the beginning, yes, he said finally. In the beginning, I thought we had something real. I thought we wanted the same things, built the same kind of life together. But I was wrong, because what I wanted was partnership, respect, something that mattered. And what you wanted was just the surface, the image, the money. And the maid? Natalie's voice was bitter. She gave you something real? She gave me unconditional love when I was a child who desperately needed it. She gave me loyalty when I didn't deserve it. She gave me honesty even when it cost her everything. Yes, Natalie, that's real. That's what family actually looks like. Natalie's laugh was hollow. Then I hope you're happy with your perfect little family. I'm not looking for perfect, Alexander said quietly. I'm just looking for honest. Judge Vance rapped her gavel. This court finds the marriage between Alexander James Whitmore and Natalie Ann Whitmore dissolved effective immediately. We're adjourned. The gavel came down with a sharp crack that sounded like finality. Outside the courthouse, Alexander faced a wall of cameras and reporters shouting questions. Lisa had prepared him for this. The final statement, the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. He stepped up to the microphone stand that had been set up on the courthouse steps. I'm not going to take questions today, he said, his voice calm and steady. But I do want to say something. This case was never about me. It was never about my marriage or my money or my reputation. It was about something far more important. The dignity of a woman who spent her life in service to my family and deserved to be treated with respect and compassion. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. Evelyn Grant taught me what real loyalty looks like, what real love looks like. And in the process, she taught me that success isn't measured by the size of your bank account or the number of deals you close. It's measured by how you treat the people who can't do anything for you, the people society tells you don't matter. A reporter shouted a question, but Alexander kept speaking. I'm announcing today the creation of the Evelyn Grant Foundation. It will provide legal assistance, financial support, and advocacy for domestic workers who experience abuse or exploitation in the workplace. Because what happened to Evelyn happens to thousands of people every day. People who have no voice, no power, no way to fight back. That changes now. More shouting, more questions. Alexander ignored them all. And finally, I want to say this directly to Evelyn, who I know is watching. Thank you. Thank you for loving me when I was a lonely child. Thank you for staying when you had every reason to leave. Thank you for teaching me what it means to be a decent human being. I spent 40 years building a fortune, but you spent 40 years building me into someone worth being. And that's the only thing that really matters. He stepped back from the microphone. Catherine was at his elbow immediately, guiding him toward the waiting car. The questions kept coming, cameras flashing, but Alexander didn't hear any of it. He was already thinking about home, about Evelyn, about the life he was going to build now that he'd finally understood what was worth building. The estate looked different when he arrived, or maybe he was just seeing it differently now. It wasn't a museum anymore, it wasn't a monument to success, it was just a house. And houses were only as meaningful as the people who lived in them. He found Evelyn in the garden, tending to the roses she'd been cultivating for 30 years. She looked up as he approached, shears in hand, dirt on her apron, and smiled. "I watched," she said simply. And I'm proud of you." Something in Alexander's chest loosened. The foundation was supposed to be a surprise. It's a good surprise, the best kind. She set down the shears and stood, brushing dirt from her hands. "But you didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did. You changed my life, Evelyn. The least I can do is try to change things for people like you." "People like me," she repeated softly. "You mean invisible people?" "You were never invisible, I was just too blind to see you properly." She reached out and cupped his face with one weathered hand, the way she used to when he was 7 and came to her crying about something he couldn't explain to anyone else. "You see me now, that's what matters." They stood there in the garden, surrounded by roses and afternoon light, and Alexander felt something he hadn't felt in decades. Peace. Not the artificial peace that came from success, or the hollow peace that came from not asking too many questions about your own life. Real peace. The kind that came from knowing you'd done the right thing even when it cost you everything. "What happens now?" Evelyn asked. Now we figure out what comes next. Together. But 30 miles away, in a small apartment in Queens that Derek Castellano was barely managing to afford, Natalie sat on a worn couch with her phone in her hand, staring at a news article about the Whitmore divorce. She'd lost everything. Her marriage, her money, her reputation, her future. Derek had left her 2 weeks ago once it became clear there was no more money to salvage, and being associated with her was social suicide. She was alone now, truly alone. And for the first time in her life, she had no one to blame but herself. She could try to spin this, could find a way to reframe the narrative one more time. There were always tabloids willing to pay for a story, always someone willing to listen to a villain trying to justify themselves. But she was tired. So tired. And maybe, just maybe, she was also starting to understand something she'd spent her entire life avoiding. Actions had consequences, and some consequences couldn't be escaped or explained away or covered up with the right PR strategy. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "You were right about one thing. He never really saw you, but you never really saw him either. Maybe that's something worth thinking about." No name, no signature, but Natalie knew who it was. Only one person would take the time to reach out even after everything she'd done. Evelyn. Natalie stared at the message for a long time. Then slowly, she typed a response. "I'm sorry." She wasn't sure if it was true. Wasn't sure if she was capable of genuine remorse or if this was just one more performance, one more attempt to salvage something from the wreckage. But she hit send anyway. The response came 3 minutes later. "I know. Nothing else. No forgiveness. No condemnation. Just acknowledgement. Just witness." Natalie set down her phone and looked around her small, empty apartment. And for the first time in 5 years, she allowed herself to cry. Not the calculated tears of someone playing a role, but the raw, ugly tears of someone who'd finally run out of masks to hide behind. 6 months after that, the Evelyn Grant Foundation opened its doors in a renovated brownstone in Brooklyn. The launch event was attended by labor activists, civil rights leaders, domestic workers from across the city, and a surprising number of the wealthy elite who'd decided that maybe, just maybe, they should start paying attention to the people who kept their homes running. Evelyn stood at the podium in a simple but elegant dress that Alexander had insisted on buying her. She looked out at the crowd, at all the faces watching her, waiting for her to speak. And for a moment, she was that frightened woman again, the one who'd spent 3 years apologizing for existing. Then she saw Alexander in the front row, smiling at her with the kind of pride that only came from watching someone you love step into their power. And beside him, in the seat of honor, was an empty chair. Not for anyone who was absent, but as a symbol, a reminder, for everyone who'd ever felt invisible. Evelyn took a breath and began to speak. "My name is Evelyn Grant. I'm 63 years old. I've been a domestic worker for 40 years, and until very recently, I believed that my life didn't matter, that my story wasn't worth telling, that people like me were meant to stay in the background, quiet and grateful and small. She paused, her hands gripping the edges of the podium. I was wrong. The room was completely silent. This foundation exists because one person decided that my dignity mattered more than his comfort, that my truth mattered more than his reputation, that my life, my invisible, ordinary, unremarkable life, was worth fighting for. But here's the thing I want you to understand: I am not special. What happened to me happens every single day to thousands of people who work in homes across this country and around the world. People who are underpaid, overworked, disrespected, and abused. People who have no power, no voice, no way to fight back. Her voice grew stronger. This foundation is for them. For every housekeeper who's been called worthless. For every nanny who's been threatened with deportation. For every caregiver who's been denied basic dignity. For everyone who's ever been told they don't matter. This is us saying, you do. You matter. Your life has value. Your story deserves to be heard. And we will fight for you the way someone finally fought for me. The applause started small, then built into something thunderous. People stood. Some were crying. Others were nodding, recognizing themselves in Evelyn's words, seeing their own invisible struggles finally acknowledged. Alexander stood too, his eyes bright with unshed tears. And when Evelyn looked at him, she saw something that made 40 years of suffering almost worth it. She saw family, real family, the kind that wasn't defined by blood or contracts or social expectations, the kind that was built on respect and loyalty, and the simple revolutionary act of seeing someone and choosing to love them anyway. That night, back at the estate, Alexander and Evelyn sat on the terrace overlooking the ocean. The stars were out, bright and clear, and the sound of waves provided a gentle backdrop to their comfortable silence. "Thank you," Evelyn said finally. "For what?" "For seeing me, for hearing me, for giving me back my voice." Alexander shook his head. "You always had a voice, Evelyn. I just finally learned to listen." They sat there as the night deepened. Two people who'd found each other across the artificial boundaries of class and privilege and expectation. A billionaire who'd learned that wealth meant nothing without humanity, and a housekeeper who'd learned that her life had always mattered. She just needed someone to help her remember. In the distance, the lights of Manhattan glittered like scattered diamonds. Alexander had once thought those lights represented success, power, everything he was supposed to want. Now he knew better. Real success wasn't measured in stock prices or magazine covers or the number of zeros in your bank account. It was measured in the courage to do the right thing when no one was watching, in the strength to protect those who couldn't protect themselves, in the wisdom to recognize that every human life, no matter how invisible society tried to make it, had infinite, immeasurable worth. He'd spent 40 years building an empire, but in the end, it was one ordinary woman with an extraordinary heart who taught him what it truly meant to be rich. And that was a lesson worth more than any fortune he could ever accumulate. 2 years later, the Evelyn Grant Foundation had expanded to 6 cities and helped over 3,000 domestic workers secure better working conditions, fair wages, and legal protections. Evelyn had become a sought-after speaker on labor rights and dignity in the workplace. She'd testified before Congress. She'd been interviewed by major media outlets. She'd become, in her own quiet way, a voice for the voiceless. Alexander had stepped back from day-to-day management of his company to focus on philanthropy and the foundation. He was happier than he'd ever been, doing work that actually mattered, using his privilege to open doors instead of just accumulating more power behind them. And one evening, as they sat in the garden watching the sunset, Evelyn turned to him with a question. "Do you ever regret it? Everything you gave up?" Alexander thought about it. About the marriage that had been a beautiful lie. About the reputation he'd had to rebuild from scratch. About all the people who'd said he was crazy for throwing away a perfect life over a housekeeper. Then he looked at Evelyn, this woman who'd loved him when he was unlovable, who'd stood by him when she had every reason to leave, who'd taught him that the measure of a man wasn't his bank account but his character. "Not for a single second," he said. And he meant it, because some things were worth more than money. Some people were worth more than comfort. And some truths were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. Alexander Whitmore had learned that lesson later than he should have, but he'd learned it just in time. 5 years after the foundation's launch, on a crisp autumn morning, Alexander received an unexpected letter. The return address was from a women's shelter in upstate New York, and the handwriting was unfamiliar. careful, almost childlike in its precision. He opened it at the kitchen table where Evelyn was preparing tea, her movements now slower but still graceful, still purposeful. "Dear Mr. Whitmore, you don't know me, but I know your story. 5 years ago, I was working as a nanny for a wealthy family in Connecticut. They treated me like I was invisible, worse than invisible, like I was something dirty they had to tolerate. When I saw Ms. Grant's interview, when I heard her speak about feeling worthless, about apologizing for things she didn't do, I saw myself, and for the first time I realized I wasn't alone. Your foundation helped me leave that situation. They gave me legal support, helped me find safe housing, connected me with other opportunities. Today, I'm a certified teacher. I have my own apartment. I have dignity. But more than that, I have hope. Because if Evelyn Grant could find her voice after 40 years of silence, then maybe we all can. Thank you for seeing her. And in seeing her, thank you for seeing all of us." With gratitude, Maria Santos Alexander's hands trembled slightly as he set down the letter. Evelyn noticed and crossed to him, reading over his shoulder. When she finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "There are thousands like her," she said softly. "Thousands who are living the life I lived. And now they know they don't have to. Because of you," Alexander said. "Because of us," she corrected. "Because someone with power decided to use it for something that mattered." Later that afternoon, they drove into the city for the Foundation's annual gala. It had become one of the most anticipated charity events of the year, not because of the celebrities who attended or the amount of money raised, but because of what it represented: a shift in consciousness, a recognition that dignity wasn't reserved for those who could afford it. As they walked into the ballroom, Alexander noticed something that made him stop in his tracks. At every table, along with the usual place settings and name cards, there was a small placard with a quote, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become. Mo Carl Jung." And beneath it, in smaller letters, "In honor of Evelyn Grant, who chose to become unstoppable." Evelyn saw it too, and her eyes filled with tears. The good kind. The kind that came from being seen and valued and celebrated, not despite her story, but because of it. The evening was filled with speeches and testimonials, but the most powerful moment came when a young woman, no more than 25, approached the microphone during the open sharing portion of the program. "My name is Jennifer," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "And 2 years ago, I wanted to die." The room went silent. "I was working as a housekeeper for a family who treated me like I was worthless, who made me feel like I was lucky to be exploited. I started believing them, started thinking maybe they were right. Maybe I didn't deserve anything better." She paused, wiping her eyes. "Then someone showed me Evelyn's interview, and I heard her say that her life mattered, that she mattered, and something inside me woke up. I called the Foundation's hotline that same night. They helped me leave. They helped me file a formal complaint. They helped me remember that I was human." Jennifer looked directly at Evelyn, who sat in the front row with tears streaming down her face. "Ms. Grant, you saved my life, not because you rescued me personally, but because you showed me it was possible to save myself. You showed me that survival wasn't enough, that I deserved dignity, that I deserved respect, that I deserved to be seen." The applause was deafening. Later, as the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Alexander found Evelyn standing alone on the balcony, looking out over the city lights. "You're thinking about something," he said, joining her. "I'm thinking about time," she said, "about how much of it I wasted feeling small, feeling invisible, feeling like my life didn't matter. It always mattered. I know that now. But Alexander, what haunts me is thinking about all the people who never get to know, who spend their entire lives being told they're worthless, and who die believing it." He put his arm around her shoulders. "That's why we keep doing this work. That's why we keep telling your story. Because maybe, just maybe, we can reach a few more people before they spend 40 years believing the lies." Evelyn leaned into him, and they stood there in comfortable silence, two souls who'd found each other across impossible divides. "You know what the best part is?" Evelyn said finally. "What's that?" "Natalie thought she was destroying me when she treated me that way. She thought she was proving I was worthless. But instead, she accidentally proved the opposite. She showed that even when someone tries to break you, even when they use all their power to make you feel small, you can still rise, you can still speak, you can still matter. She gave you a platform without meaning to." "Exactly. And now that platform is helping thousands of people she never thought about, never cared about, never saw as fully human. There's poetry in that, don't you think?" Alexander smiled. There's justice in it. As they drove home that night, past the glittering towers and busy streets, past the invisible people working night shifts and cleaning offices and keeping the city running while everyone else slept, Alexander thought about legacy. He'd spent his youth building a fortune. He'd spent his middle age maintaining an empire. And he'd almost spent his entire life missing the point. Real legacy wasn't measured in buildings that bore your name or companies that survived you. It was measured in lives you'd touched, voices you'd amplified, dignity you'd restored to people the world had tried to erase. Evelyn Grant had given him that gift, the gift of understanding what actually mattered, and in return he'd given her the one thing she'd been denied for 40 years, the simple, revolutionary acknowledgement that her life had always had value, that she had always mattered, that she had always been enough. And in the end, that was the only story worth telling.